Savitri is hearing a voice from above which is explaining to her the next step that she has to take in her sadhana in order to achieve the spiritual realization. She has experienced the psychic realization, she's found her soul, she's felt the oneness with the origin, and there's followed a very happy, wonderful transformation of the nature. Now she is being challenged to take the next step, a complete widening, a complete dissolution of the individual personality. And this, she's told she should do this because this is her mission. She has come down into this world to help humanity, and she has to be able to identify with the vast universal suffering. And in order to do that, the soul must widen beyond the boundaries of the universe. The soul must become wider than the universe and feel eternity as its very stuff, its very substance. So I'm going to read on from line 198. If thou wouldst a little loosen the vast chain, draw back from the world that the idea has made, thy mind's selection from the infinite, thy senses' gloss on the infinitesimal's dance. Then shalt thou know how the great bondage came. Banish all thought from thee, and be God's void. Then shalt thou uncover the unknowable, and the superconscient, conscious grow on thy tops. Infinity's vision through thy gaze shall pierce. Thou shalt look into the eyes of the unknown, find the hid truth in things seen null and false. Behind things known, discover mysteries rear. Thou shalt be one with God's bare reality and the miraculous world he has become, and the diviner miracles still to be, when nature, who is now unconscious God, translucent grows to the eternal's light, her seeing his sight, her walk his steps of power, and life is filled with a spiritual joy, and matter is the Spirit's willing bride. Consent to be nothing and none. Dissolve time's work. Cast off thy mind. step back from form and name. Annul thyself, that only God may be. Thus spoke the mighty and uplifting voice, and Savitri heard. She bowed her head and mused, plunging her deep regard into herself, in her soul's privacy, in the silent night. Aloof and standing back, detached and calm, a witness of the drama of herself, a student of her own interior scene. She watched the passion and the toil of life, and heard in the crowded thoroughfares of mind the unceasing tread and passage of her thoughts. Bärbel, you will begin?
If thou wouldst a little loosen the vast chain, throw back from the world that the ideal has made, thy mind's selection from the infinite, thy senses lost on the infinitesimal dance, then shalt thou know how the great vantage came.
Yes. If thou wouldst a little loosen the vast chain of ignorance and unconsciousness, if you would like to, if you will follow your mission and loosen it a little, help evolution to make a little more progress towards its freedom and fulfillment, then what you have to do is to draw back, step back, withdraw from this world of appearances that has been made by the idea. Sri Aurobindo tells us in the Life Divine, he traces the creative process. And there's a certain level at which all these forms and movements and the process of this particular universe have been conceived in divine mind. And from that level, then there's been a progressive stepping down, a process of involution by which the great oneness of the Supreme has been divided up into, first of all, or I cannot say first of all, but anyway, the different levels, the levels of consciousness have been manifested, and at we can say at the conclusion of this involution process, that vast oneness has been split up so much into all these infinitesimal subatomic particles, and yet still somehow they are embraced in the oneness, and each of those particles, separate entities, is carrying its own particular aspect and portion of the one. and they're all going to have to realize their oneness again. But what has been created is this world that we see, this world of matter. Or we can say this world of matter is the product of the ideas embodied in those onenesses at the present stage of their evolutionary development. This world that the idea has made. And we are somehow at the moment the leaders in this evolutionary process, and we perceive the world through our minds. And we see things and we give them names. We give names to people, we give names to things, we give names to forms, to movements. So this, the product of this creative idea is many, many forms and names. Our own outermost being is the product of that process. But we are carrying within us, as everything is, the vast supreme oneness. And at this level, where there's some conscious control is possible, then it is possible to step back from the world that the idea has made. And that is what Savitri is being asked to do now. And he explains that this world, it is the selection that your mind makes out of the infinite realm of forces and possibilities. And the world that you perceive is a result of the senses' gloss on the infinitesimals' dance. A gloss is an interpretation. What I'm doing now is giving you a gloss on this particular sentence of Sri Aurobindo's Savitri. I'm interpreting as best I can, very inadequately, the thought that is behind it. And some books that are full of strange words, at the end they have a glossary, a list of words and their interpretations. So what do our senses do? We come into contact with this world around us, which feels separate to us, separate and different from ourselves. And we receive sense impressions. And those sense impressions, in the process of our individual growth, they get interpreted in our mind. And so we look at the world and we say light, fan, chair, tree, Praveen, Sergei, like this. No, these are the senses' interpretation of the sense impressions that we are receiving through our sense organs, and these are getting interpreted in our minds. Yeah? So he says you have to leave all that behind, step back from it. When you're able to separate your perception, your understanding from all this, then you will know how this great bondage has happened, this chain. You will see and understand the whole process and why also. Patricia.
Banish all thought from thee, and be God's void. Then shalt thou uncover the unknowable, and the conscious grow on thy tops. Infinity's vision through thy look into the eyes of the Almighty. Find the hid truth in things seen, known, and false. Behind things known, discover mysteries real.
Yes. So if you can banish, we send somebody out of the country and we don't want them, or you are not fit to be in Auroville, you have to go away. Banished. He says, if you banish all thought from you, if you don't allow your mind to think anymore, and you can manage to become God's void. A void is something completely empty, nothingness. If you can do that, then you will be able to uncover, to unveil what is unknowable. In the last issue of Invocation, we had an article about the unknowable. It was the transcript of a talk given by Professor Aurovinda Basu. And he explained to us that this word unknowable actually means unknowable by the mind. There's a truth, a reality, an essential, ultimate reality which can be known because we ourselves are part of that reality. But in order to know it, we have to escape from this great bondage of the mind. So he says, if you can banish all thought from thee and be God's void, then you shall be able to uncover, to unveil that unknowable reality. And what is superconscient, higher up than the level, the reach of our consciousness, what is superconscient, will become conscious to you on the higher levels of your being. And then what will happen is that the way of seeing of infinity will use your eyes. We are limited beings. Infinity is something very difficult for us to grasp, really. We have a mental concept for it, but what that is, but there is a state of infinity and eternity, and that state has its own way of being conscious. If you can become empty, become part of the unknowable, part of the superconscient, then that power of truth seeing will use your human eyes to see things as they are here. And then it will be possible for you to look into the eyes of all those unknown realities that are beyond the reach of our present consciousness. You will be able to find the truth that is hidden in things which we see and think they are worthless or false. Null means nothing. And behind the things that we know, all these forms and appearances that we know and that we feel they are very ordinary, we are so used to them, you will discover the mystery that is behind them. The great, amazing mystery that's behind all these ordinary shapes.
Great. says mysteries real.
Yes. So the rear is what is behind at the back, no? So behind the things that we know, what is hidden behind them? Mystery, something amazing. No? Scientists are just beginning to touch that mystery and find out that all this stuff that seems to us so firm and so dense is actually all moving and whirling around and extremely complex. No? But there's mystery behind that, and behind that, and behind that, and behind that. So much mystery. You wanted to ask something, Andreas?
Yes. Could we somehow link this we have read to Pratyahara? Or because it's
To what?
to Pratyahara?
What is Pratyahara? Sorry, I haven't studied Indian philosophy. I've only studied Sri Aurobindo. Explain to me, Pratyahara.
Well, as long as I know, it's from the 8 limbs of yoga, from the Ashtanga.
From the Ashtanga Yoga.
And it's one of the limbs that talks about withdrawing the senses inward.
Yes.
Like to awaken the...
Yes. This is now what Savitri is going to be doing is one aspect of yoga, the aspect of stepping back as the witness. And we will see there are several steps in that. When I have written about this, I did a research project on Sri Aurobindo's first major spiritual experience, which is connected with this. And there I linked it to something that Mother has told to the young people in the ashram when she started studying French with them, using a French translation of the Dhammapada, of Buddha's sermon. And the first few verses, they explain about this process of stepping back and observing. So that's what we are going to see. These 4 steps of observing, assessing, controlling, and finally being able to achieve complete mastery over the mind, complete control, so that there's a total silence. And then there's a very interesting experience that happens, which he's just referred to in these lines here. That's why one of the reasons why this book is so important to us. No? I mean, why this book of yoga is so important to us. We've seen about the inner worlds, we have seen about the soul realization, and now we are going to see about the steps of the spiritual realization. And then there will be one more realization beyond that. You'll read? Yes.
Thou shalt be one with God's reality, and the miraculous world he has become, and the divine miracle still to be. When nature, who is now unconscious God,
Translucent.
grows in the eternal light, has seen his sight, has walked his steps of power, and life is filled with the spiritual joy, and matters is the Spirit's willing bride.
Thank you. He says, if you can do this, you will become one with, you will be united with the bare reality of the Supreme Existence. And then you will also be one with this miraculous world that he has become. All this is him. He has projected himself as all this. And there's another step still to come, the diviner miracle still to be, which will happen in the future, when nature, all these appearances of the world and movements of the world, they are now representing unconscious God. God who has involved his being, his existence, his consciousness, his bliss in all this unconsciousness and insensibility. When nature, who is now unconscious God, grows translucent, something that is translucent allows the light to pass through, like the glass of these light covers here. We don't see the bulb itself, but we see the light shining through. It's translucent. So nature will become translucent to the Eternal's light. The Eternal's light will of consciousness and bliss and power will shine through all the appearances of nature. And the seeing of nature will become the same as the seeing of the Supreme, Eternal and Infinite. And the movements of nature, the forward movements of nature, will express his steps of power, and all life will be filled with a spiritual joy, and matter will be the Spirit's willing bride. This will be the transformation of matter, the material world. So if you want to assist in this process, then she has to do what is described in the next 3 lines. Please, Alice.
Consent to be nothing and none. Dissolve time's work. Cast off thy mind. Step back from form and name. Annul thyself, that only God may be.
Consent, agree, accept. Not to exist, to be nothing, to dissolve your individuality, your personality. Dissolve all this work that's been done in time to bring you, each of us individuals, to this point where we are now. The starting point is to cast off the mind, to step back from experiencing and perceiving form and name. Annul thyself, make yourself nothing, so that nothing will exist except God, the one existent, the supreme reality, the origin of everything. You read, Andreas?
Thus spoke Kumaitya uplifting voice, and Savitri heard. She bowed her head and mused, plunging a deep regard into herself, in her soul's privacy in the silent night.
So she's received this indication. She's been pointed out the way and given her instructions, and she immediately responds, no? She plunges her regard, her conscious gaze, deep into herself as she's there in the privacy of her soul. Of course, she's there in the hut and Shraddhavan is sleeping, but she's going deep into the private space of her own inner consciousness, surrounded by this silent night. And she takes First of all, the witness stand. Gumsun.
Auroville and stepping back, detached and calm, a witness of the drama of the self, a student of her own intelligence sin. She watched the passion and the toil of life, and heard it was crowded through
Thoroughfares.
thoroughfares of mind. The unceasing thread and passage of her thoughts.
Yes. So she takes the position of the witness and just watches what is going on inside herself. The drama, all the activity, the play. And she's studying that. She watches, she observes it to understand it. A student of her own interior scene, her inner scene, what is going on within herself. Mother tells us that she started doing this when she was a small child. When she was 5 years old, she had a little chair and she used to sit in it and do this, and she said that was the most interesting thing. Her father wanted to take her to the circus, or she was supposed to go and play with some friends, but for her this looking inside and seeing all this was the most interesting thing. She was a student of her own interior scene. So that is what Savitri is doing now. She's watching everything that's going on there, the passion, the intensity, and the toil of life. And it's as if in the mind, it's like a crowded city. Thoroughfares are streets, streets where you can pass through. And although perhaps cars and bikes and things can pass through, the word also suggests that there's lots of people. Thoroughfares. It means throughfares. You can pass through. It's not a dead end. You don't have to turn around and come back. You can pass through and go somewhere else. So there she can hear the tread. It's as if many people are walking. The unceasing tread and passage of her thoughts. That's the first thing that we notice when we try to do this, that we can't stop it. I remember very well when I was shopping with my mother when I was about 12 years old. We'd gone to buy some dress material or something, and I said to her, I wish I could stop this, all these thoughts going on in my mind. And she said, yes, but unfortunately we can't. So that was the education that I received, unfortunately. She didn't tell me, yes, look, if you will stand back and watch, you'll be able to stop it. Anyway, now I know. The unceasing tread and passage of the thoughts. And of course, these thoughts are coming from all over the place. Savitri will observe where they are coming from. Praveen.
All she allowed to rise that chose to stir, calling, compelling not, forbidding not. She left to all the process formed in time, and the free initiative of nature's will.
So this is important at the first step, that you don't try to control it immediately. You just observe. So she allowed everything to come up. She's just observing it. Whatever chooses to move there. She doesn't call anything. She doesn't compel. She doesn't prevent anything. She doesn't forbid anything. She just leaves all this internal movement just to go its own way according to this process that's already been formed in time, in evolution, and this free initiative of nature's will. But this stepping back implies that you no longer completely identify with that. No, you don't think, oh, this is me. You see that, oh yes, this is the work of time, this is nature's will. Let me just observe and see what is going on here. You don't. This stepping back means not identifying with it. Suresh?
Those following the complex human play, she heard the drunkard's voice behind the
Scenes.
Perceived the original libretto's set and the organ theme of the composer force.
Yes. So, following, just observing this complex, complicated human play, she's able to hear the prompter's voice behind the scenes. This is something from the theatre. In the theatre, the actors are on the stage and they're supposed to have remembered their lines, but perhaps they may forget. So there's somebody down there, we can't see him, but he reminds them that this is where you are in the play and this is what you're supposed to say. So it's something like that. Behind all this complex play, there's something that's suggesting what has to happen next, that is keeping the play going. The prompter's voice behind the scene. And she's able to see that there's a libretto. A libretto, again, is the words, not that are spoken, but are sung. If there's a musical play or an opera, the libretto is the words that are sung. So she sees that, oh, all this is happening because somebody has written out the words beforehand. It's all planned, it's prepared, this is what has to be said. And she can hear the music that the songs are being sung to, the organ theme. An organ is the most complicated musical instrument that there is. It has many, many keys, so many keys you can't play them with your hands, you have to play with your feet. And in addition to the keys, there are also stops, so you can pull out so that you play different kinds of musical instruments, different kinds of voices. So there's very rich resources of possibilities that are there in this organ theme. And behind all this is the composer who has composed the music, decided how it should be played. And that is a force, an energy, a creative energy. She's just beginning to be aware of all that. Sergei.
All should be heard that surges from man's depth. The animal instincts prowling make life's streets. The impulses that whisper to the heart, and passions thunder chase through the mirrors. She saw the powers that stare from the abyss, and the wondrous light that liberates the soul.
Yes. So she can see everything that comes up from the deep inner being of a human being, with its many different levels. So different things come up, like water coming out of a spring, or we see sometimes pictures of lava lakes inside volcanoes. And something comes up here, bloop, and something comes up here, bloop, like that. So coming up from these deeper parts of our being that usually we are not at all aware of. There's all kinds of stuff. She begins to see that. She sees how in our consciousness we are carrying instincts that we've been carrying with us since we were animals. The animal instincts. They are prowling about, hidden there, hiding behind the trees that are growing in our life. And there are impulses, as if somebody is whispering to us, making suggestions, telling our heart what to want, what to do. And sometimes, right through the whole body, through the nerves, the very intense feelings come. We may not pay much attention to them if we are occupied with our minds, getting on with the... But if we begin to pay attention, we can become aware of these things. No? Passions, thunder chase, sweeping the nerves, all through the nerves of the whole body, all kinds of very intense feelings coming and then going. No? She begins to be able to see all this. She saw the powers that stare from the abyss, the deep, dark bottom of the sea. It's as if there are very powerful beings looking from there. And on the other hand, from above, from the highest levels, the wordless light that liberates the soul. A wonderful ray of light may come. It doesn't say anything, but it lights up everything and makes one see things in a completely different way, which is liberating, freeing from all those other influences. Joel, is it your turn?
But most her gaze pursued the birth of thought, affranchised from the look of surface mind. She paused not to survey the official case, the issue of forms from the office of the brain, its factory of thought sounds and soundless words, and voices stored within, unheard by men, its mint and treasury of shining coin.
Thank you. But most her gaze pursued the birth of thought. There are all those instincts and feelings, but where are the thoughts coming from? And now she's not looking with the surface consciousness. When we look at our thoughts, if we do stop to observe or become aware of our thoughts, usually they have some kind of disguise. The official case, the official version, what's put in the newspapers or on the TV, this is what happened. Or there are the forms. You have a report to make. You have to make it in this form. Recently I've had a lot of forms to fill in. And if you have to fill in the forms, it's very difficult to tell things the way they really are, because there's only a limited number of things that they want you to tell them. So the office of the brain, it's as if in the brain there's an office, and they say, yes, here's the form, fill it in. And that's the way that your surface thoughts come out. And even behind that, from this office of the brain, there are kind of thought sounds, and there are even soundless words. If you really look, there are kind of little blips of energy which are carrying thoughts, or they immediately get translated into words. And we hear voices stored inside the office of the brain. So all these things, Sri Aurobindo compares them to coins. The metal, which could take many different shapes, it passes through the mint and it gets turned into coins which have specific appearances and denominations. You know, there's a 1 rupee coin and a 2 and a 5 and a 10 and like that. So they are not different from each other. There are many that are the same. She's not paying attention to these things. She realizes that these are not very significant. Lela.
These were but counters in mind symbol game, the gramophone's discs, a reproduction's film, a list of signs, a cipher and a code.
Yes. So these forms that our thoughts takes, she said they're counters. When you have a board game, you know the game Ludo, the children play it in the kindergarten, you throw the dice and then you can move your counters so many steps. So these coinage, what comes out of they're just pieces that we use to play this mind game. This game which is dealing with symbols, not realities. Or they're just repetitions. Now, of course, we don't know what a gramophone is anymore. Do you know what a gramophone is? No, I'm asking this young lady here. No, she doesn't know. You are old enough to know. Some decades ago, if we wanted to listen to music, we had a kind of plastic disc on which had been recorded the music, and we would put it into a gramophone. And the gramophone would have a needle. We'd put it onto the disc, and the gramophone would be, in the old days, it would be wound up. In my grandmother's house, they had one of them. In my time, it was all electric. And then the music will play. Nowadays, we have CDs. It's a kind of modernized version of the same thing. But the thing about it is, it plays only what has been recorded. It's just a repetition, a reproduction of something. Or maybe it's a film which is reproducing something that happened. Or these coins that our mind uses, they're just a list of signs. Table, chair, finger, toe, a cipher and a code. This means that the list of signs is in a secret language, that we have to have some kind of key before we can understand what has been written there. So our thoughts are all these kind of things.
No unseen subtle body thought is born, for there it enters from the cosmic field.
Yes, so this is enough for us today. Either thought comes up to us from the subtle levels of our own being, or it may enter into us from the universal field around. And if you want to practice this, if you want to do some homework, I hope you'll be able to confirm Sri Aurobindo's observations. So we shall see Savitri passing through several more stages before reaching the level of complete silencing of the mind and dissolution of the individual being. It's quite a long canto, but that's where we'll stop for today. If thou wouldst a little loosen the vast chain, draw back from the world that the idea has made, thy mind's selection from the infinite, thy senses' gloss on the infinitesimal's dance. Then shalt thou know how the great bondage came. Banish all thought from thee, and be God's void. Then shalt thou uncover the unknowable, and the superconscient conscious grow on thy tops. Infinity's vision through thy gaze shall pierce. Thou shalt look into the eyes of the unknown, find the hid truth in things seen null and false. Behind things known, discover mysteries rear. Thou shalt be one with God's bare reality, and the miraculous world He has become, and the diviner miracles still to be, when nature, who is now unconscious God, translucent grows to the Eternal's light, her seeing His sight, her walk His steps of power, and life is filled with a spiritual joy, and matter is the Spirit's willing bride. Consent to be nothing and none. Dissolve time's work. Cast off thy mind, step back from form and name. Annul thyself, that only God may be. Thus spoke the mighty and uplifting voice, and Savitri heard. She bowed her head and mused, plunging her deep regard into herself, in her soul's privacy, in the silent night. Aloof and standing back, detached and calm, a witness of the drama of herself, a student of her own interior scene. She watched the passion and the toil of life, and heard in the crowded thoroughfares of mind the unceasing tread and passage of her thoughts. All she allowed to rise that chose to stir, calling, compelling naught, forbidding naught, she left all to the process formed in time and the free initiative of nature's will. Thus, following the complex human play, she heard the prompter's voice behind the scenes, perceived the original librettos set and the organ theme of the composer force. All she beheld that surges from man's depths. The animal instincts prowling mid life's trees, the impulses that whisper to the heart, and passion's thunder chase sweeping the nerves. She saw the powers that stare from the abyss, and the wordless light that liberates the soul. But most her gaze pursued the birth of thought. Affranchised from the look of surface mind, she paused not to survey the official case, the issue of forms from the office of the brain, its factory of thought sounds and soundless words, and voices stored within, unheard by men, its mint and treasury of shining coin. These were but counters in mind's symbol game, a gramophone's discs, a reproduction's film, a list of signs, a cipher and a code. In our unseen subtle body thought is born, or there it enters from the cosmic field.